Before the first dawn, before the Nile carved its life-giving path through the heart of a golden desert, before men raised their voices in prayer and the stones of temples reached for the heavens, there was only the endless darkness. The ancient Egyptians called this darkness Nun, the primordial waters without form or shape, an infinite ocean of silence and shadow. It was within this eternal night that the first spark of creation stirred, and from this spark, Ra was born. He was not simply a god among many, he was the source, the blazing heart from which life itself would flow. In the oldest myths told in Heliopolis, Ra emerged as Khepri, the morning sun, self-created from the void. He rose from the sacred lotus that floated upon the waters of Nun, a flower that had never bloomed until that moment, its petals opening to reveal the first rays of light. In other tellings, he was a radiant child emerging from a golden egg laid by a celestial bird. However the story was told, the message was always the same: Ra was the beginning. With his voice, he spoke the world into being. The air and the moisture came forth at his command, followed by the sky, Nut, and the earth, Geb. Rivers began to flow, stars began to shine, and life began to stir in the deep green cradle of the Nile Valley. From that day forward, Ra took his place as the ruler of the sky, the master of Ma'at, the divine order of truth, balance, and harmony. His light separated day from night, life from death, order from chaos. Without him, crops would not grow, the river would not flood, and life itself would wither into dust. Yet Ra was not content to remain still in the heavens. Every day, he sailed across the sky in his resplendent bark, the Mandjet, the boat of millions of years, bringing light and warmth to every corner of the two lands. To the ancient Egyptians, the journey of Ra across the sky was not mere astronomy, it was a living, divine drama, unfolding anew with each sunrise. As dawn approached, the eastern horizon blushed with gold and crimson, heralding Ra's appearance. The falcon-headed god would rise, crowned with the blazing solar disk, a protective serpent coiled around it, shimmering with divine fire. His presence meant more than light, it meant the renewal of the covenant between gods and men. The people of Egypt awoke with the sun. Farmers stepped into their fields, guiding wooden plows behind oxen while the dew still clung to the young shoots of barley and wheat. Fishermen pushed their reed boats into the Nile, trusting that the light of Ra would guide them. Priests in pure white linen ascended the steps of the temples, their hands carrying offerings of bread, beer, incense, and flowers. They sang hymns that echoed off the massive stone columns, words meant to honor the sun god and encourage his safe journey across the sky. High above, Ra's boat sailed smoothly in the daylight, accompanied by a host of divine beings. Sia, the personification of divine perception, stood at the front of the boat, guiding the course through wisdom. Hu, the embodiment of divine command, ensured that Ra's words became reality. Powerful deities such as Hathor, goddess of joy and love, and Sekhmet, the lioness of war and plague, would sometimes accompany him to bless the world or defend against threats. But even in daylight, Ra's journey was not without risk. Shadows lurked at the edges of the world, seeking moments of weakness. The greatest of these threats came not during the day, but after sunset, when Ra would leave the living world and enter the Duat, the underworld. This was no place of rest. It was a realm of trials, a dangerous labyrinth where monstrous beings roamed, rivers of fire flowed, and the laws of the living world no longer applied. And in its deepest darkness, one enemy awaited, the colossal serpent Apophis, embodiment of chaos, who sought nothing less than the end of creation. The Egyptians believed that the daily rhythm of sunrise and sunset was the heartbeat of the universe, and that without Ra's courage and strength, the cycle would end. His voyage was an eternal struggle, for darkness could never be destroyed, it could only be held back, night after night, by the unyielding light of the sun god. This understanding gave their lives meaning. As long as Ra fought, there was hope. As long as the sun rose, order triumphed over chaos. By midday, Ra's light was at its strongest. Fields shimmered under the sun's gaze, and the great river sparkled like molten gold. In the marketplaces of cities like Memphis and Thebes, traders displayed goods brought from far-off lands: lapis lazuli from the east, cedar wood from Lebanon, gold from Nubia. All of it existed because the Nile's waters, blessed by the sun's warmth, sustained life. Even the pharaoh, the living embodiment of Ra on earth, owed his power to the divine light, ruling in the god's name to uphold Ma'at. As the afternoon waned, Ra's boat began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Shadows lengthened, the air cooled, and the people prepared for night. But for Ra, the true challenge was only beginning. The bright blue of the sky deepened into crimson and purple, and the sun touched the horizon, casting its last golden beams over the desert. The moment the solar disk vanished from mortal sight, the Mandjet slipped beneath the earth and entered the Duat. The Duat was unlike any place known to the living. Its rivers were not of water, but of darkness and starlight, and its shores were lined with gates guarded by beings with bodies of men and heads of beasts: crocodiles, jackals, hawks, and serpents, each demanding the correct spells to pass. Here, the living could not follow, but they could aid their god through prayer, ritual, and magic. Temples would echo at night with chants designed to strengthen Ra's power and weaken Apophis before the final confrontation. The ancient Egyptians did not see this as superstition, but as participation in the cosmic battle. To them, every night was a question: would Ra survive the journey, and would dawn come again? And so, each day's sunset was not the end of light, but the start of a perilous voyage through the heart of darkness, one that would decide the fate of all creation. The moment Ra's solar bark slipped below the western horizon, the world above surrendered to night. To mortals, this was the simple darkness of evening. But to the Egyptians who knew the sacred stories, it was the beginning of Ra's most dangerous journey. Beneath the earth lay the Duat, the underworld, a realm both feared and revered. This was the land where the sun traveled after sunset, a place of transformation, judgment, and peril. In the first hour of night, Ra's bark became the Mesektet, the night boat, different from the Mandjet of the day. The light that had filled the sky now glowed from the prow of the vessel itself, casting golden beams into the darkness. The waters of the Duat were thick. Not like the fresh current of the Nile, but heavy and slow, as though they resisted the passage of the divine. Strange shapes moved beneath the surface: spirits of the dead, half-formed beings, and creatures unknown to the living. At the front of the Mesektet stood Sia, the god of perception, holding the papyrus scrolls that contained all knowledge of the Duat. Without his wisdom, Ra could not navigate the twisting waterways or recognize the dangers that lay ahead. Beside Sia stood Hu, the god of divine utterance, whose words carried the authority to command reality itself. Together they were Ra's eyes and voice, guiding and protecting him through the first treacherous hours. The bark glided toward the first gate of the night. Guarded by fearsome beings with the heads of jackals and the bodies of men, their eyes glowing like embers. The gate was sealed by a massive slab of stone, carved with symbols of power older than the world itself. The guardian demanded the secret names and spells, for no one could pass without them, not even the sun god. Sia spoke the hidden words, and Hu uttered them with divine force. The stone groaned, light flickered, and the gate swung open, revealing the black waters beyond. The Duat was not silent. It pulsed with a low hum, as though the very darkness had a voice. Along the banks, spirits of the dead lined up, waiting for the judgment of Osiris. Some called out to Ra in desperate pleas, their voices thin and echoing like wind through a tomb. Others bowed in reverence, for the sun's presence in the underworld was a blessing, light in a place where light had no home. Ra did not stop. His path was long and the night was short. In the second hour, the Mesektet entered a narrow channel flanked by high walls of rock. From the shadows, creatures emerged, hybrid beings with crocodile jaws, scorpion tails, and human hands. They were the guardians of the passage, hostile to any who could not overpower or outwit them. Here, Set, the god of storms and chaos, took his place at the bow. In the world of the living, Set was often mistrusted for his impulsive and destructive nature. But in the Duat, his ferocity was an asset. Armed with a spear of celestial iron, he drove back the creatures, striking with precision, his laughter echoing against the stone walls. The third hour brought the bark to the fields of offerings, a strange oasis in the underworld. The air shimmered with heat, though no sun shone here. Date palms and papyrus grew in abundance, watered by streams that glowed faintly blue. This was a place where the souls of the righteous could rest, gathering strength for their own journey through the Duat. As the Mesektet passed, these souls knelt, offering baskets of bread, jars of beer, and flowers to Ra. The offerings were not for his hunger, for the sun god required no mortal food. They were symbolic acts of devotion, meant to strengthen his ka, his life force, for the trials ahead. By the fourth hour, the darkness grew thicker. The bark approached the lake of fire, its surface a shifting skin of molten red. The air stung like smoke. On its shores stood spirits condemned for their sins, liars, oath-breakers, and betrayers of Ma'at. Here they faced the eternal flames, watched over by gods with serpents coiled around their bodies. To cross, Ra's crew invoked powerful spells. The fire parted, forming a narrow path of black stone. The Mesektet glided across, its golden light reflecting in the fiery waters, a stark reminder that even in the underworld, Ra's light could not be extinguished. In the fifth hour, the journey turned perilous. The bark entered a vast cavern where the ceiling dripped with venom from serpents coiled above. Here the first signs of Apophis appeared, shadows that moved with a will of their own, coils that seemed to vanish when looked at directly. The serpent god was not yet ready to strike, but his presence poisoned the air, slowing the boat, testing the strength of the crew. Priests in the temples above the earth would chant through this hour, their voices rising in defiance of chaos, lending Ra the strength to press on. The sixth hour was the midpoint of the night, a time of transformation. Here Ra was no longer the falcon-headed god crowned with the solar disk. Instead, he became Khepri, the scarab beetle, symbol of rebirth and renewal. The boat stopped at the sacred meeting place where Ra encountered Osiris, the lord of the underworld. Their meeting was solemn but vital. Osiris represented the eternal soul, Ra the eternal light. When their forces combined, they renewed the cycle of existence, ensuring that both the living and the dead could move forward into the next day. Without this union, the dawn would never come. Osiris blessed the journey, and the Mesektet continued into deeper darkness. Ahead lay the remaining hours of night, and the inevitable confrontation with Apophis. The serpent waited where the path narrowed, a shadow that swallowed all light, his hunger eternal. But Ra had faced him countless times before, and each time, the battle had been fierce, testing even the sun god's strength. The night was not over, and the greatest danger still lay ahead. The seventh hour of the night was the threshold between the journey's trials and its greatest danger. Here the Duat narrowed into a black abyss where the waters turned still and thick, as if holding their breath. The air grew heavy, and even the gods aboard the Mesektet spoke in hushed tones. This was the lair of Apophis, the eternal serpent, known to the Egyptians as Apep, chaos-given form, older than the sun itself. Apophis did not dwell in the underworld like other beings. He was the darkness between worlds, the embodiment of the void that existed before creation. He hated light, despised order, and sought the undoing of all that Ra had brought into being. Every night, he would wait for this moment, lurking in the black waters, his massive coils circling unseen. When the time was right, he would strike, attempting to swallow the solar bark whole and plunge the world into endless night. The first sign was silence. Even the lapping of the Duat's waters ceased, and a suffocating stillness fell over the bark. The crew knew what this meant. They tightened their grip on their weapons, whispered protective incantations, and waited. Then, from the darkness ahead, 2 points of light appeared, cold, venomous, and unblinking. They were not stars. They were the eyes of Apophis. The serpent's head emerged from the abyss, its size beyond comprehension. His scales were black and red, glistening like molten rock, each one larger than a temple door. His jaws could unhinge wide enough to swallow mountains, and from his mouth poured a hiss that shook the air like thunder. Behind him, the coils rose, each as thick as the pillars of Karnak, twisting and curling in the water. His sheer presence warped the darkness, as if the Duat itself bent to his will. At the bow of the Mesektet, Set stepped forward, spear in hand, eyes locked on the serpent. This was his moment. Though Set was the god of storms, chaos, and violence, here in the Duat he was Ra's champion, the one strong enough to match Apophis in fury. His muscles coiled like the serpent he faced, and he shouted a challenge that echoed into the endless dark. Apophis struck without warning. His massive head lunged forward, jaws wide, fangs dripping venom. The impact rocked the solar bark, sending sprays of black water into the air. Set met the strike with his spear, driving it deep into the serpent's snout. The beast recoiled, but its pain only fueled its rage. The coils tightened around the bark, squeezing until the wooden planks groaned. The gods aboard began chanting spells of binding, their voices weaving a net of divine power meant to restrain Apophis. Sia, god of perception, read aloud the ancient words carved into the scrolls of the Duat, calling upon the original moment of creation when light first pierced the darkness. Hu, the god of divine utterance, spoke the names of power that could weaken any foe. Each name struck Apophis like a blade of light, cutting through his shadowy essence. But the serpent was not easily subdued. From his mouth poured a torrent of venom and smoke, filling the air with choking fumes. The bark's light dimmed, the golden glow fading under the weight of chaos. Apophis's coils thrashed, tearing at the current, seeking to pull the vessel under. Even the waters seemed to obey him, forming whirlpools that tried to drag the gods down into the abyss. Then came the moment of binding, the critical point in the battle. The priests above the earth, in the temples of Egypt, would be awake, chanting the book of overthrowing Apophis, striking images of the serpent with knives, burning effigies, and spitting on his likeness to weaken him in the spiritual realm. These rituals, synchronized with Ra's struggle, gave strength to the gods in the Duat. With renewed power, Set hurled his spear once more, this time piercing Apophis's neck. The serpent roared, a sound that was felt rather than heard, vibrating through the bones of all who faced him. Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order, appeared briefly at the stern of the bark, her feather crown shining like a shard of the sun. Her presence restored balance to the moment, giving Ra the strength to rise in his full glory, no longer in the form of Khepri. Ra now shone as the midday sun, even in the heart of the underworld. His solar disk blazed, sending spears of light through the darkness, burning Apophis's flesh and forcing him to release the boat. The serpent writhed, retreating into the black waters, his eyes fading until they were gone. But the gods knew this was not a final victory. Apophis could not be destroyed, chaos was eternal. He would return the next night, as he had since the beginning of time. The waters calmed, the air cleared, and the bark sailed forward. The danger had passed, but the night was not yet over. The remaining hours of the Duat still held their own trials, and Ra's journey to dawn had only a short time left before the horizon would begin to glow. The 8th hour began in silence, not the ominous silence of Apophis's lair, but the deep, peaceful quiet that follows a great storm. The Mesektet glided forward on calm waters, and the gods aboard breathed more easily. The glow from Ra's solar disk illuminated the cavern walls, revealing images of creation etched by divine hands in the first time. These carvings told the story of how Ra emerged from the primordial waters of Nun, bringing with him the light that birthed all life. To see these images was to be reminded why the battle against Apophis mattered, not only for the gods, but for every grain of sand, every drop of Nile water, every beating heart in the world above. In this hour, Ra's light also served another purpose. It awakened the souls of the righteous dead, guiding them toward the fields of eternal peace. They followed the bark's glow as travelers might follow the lantern of a guide through a dark forest. Some waved in gratitude, others simply watched in awe. For these souls, Ra's journey was more than a myth. It was their lifeline, the promise that the cycle of day and night, life and death, would never be broken. The 9th hour brought the bark to the waters of renewal, a luminous expanse where the Duat's rivers met and swirled in patterns like the Milky Way above the living world. Here the gods replenished their strength. Cool mist rose from the water, carrying the scent of lotus blossoms, the flower of rebirth. Ra's form began to shift once more, this time becoming that of a youthful god with the head of a scarab beetle, Khepri renewed, pushing the sun toward its rising. The Mesektet slowed, for the passage here was ceremonial. Priests in the temples above would be lighting incense, pouring libations, and singing hymns to honor Ra's renewal at this very moment. In the 10th hour, the Duat grew brighter, a strange pre-dawn light touching the horizon. The bark passed between two colossal statues of lions, their eyes set with gemstones that blazed with reflected light. These were the guardians of the threshold between night and morning, known as Shesmu and Mafde, fierce protectors of the cosmic order. They bowed their great heads as Ra passed, acknowledging the sun god's victory over darkness once again. The 11th hour was a time of preparation. Here the gods armed themselves once more, not for another battle with Apophis, but for the final surge toward the horizon. The last stretch of the Duat was often turbulent, the waters churning with the energy of transition. Spirits both benevolent and hostile appeared at the edges of the river. Some offered blessings, others sought to delay the bark, but none could withstand the will of the gods aboard. Finally came the 12th hour, the gates of dawn. Two towering cobras flanked the entrance, their hoods spread, their eyes burning with the light of the newborn sun. Between them stretched a shimmering veil, a boundary of light and shadow that separated the underworld from the world above. Here, Ra took his final form of the journey, the falcon-headed god crowned with the solar disk, majestic and unstoppable. With a cry that echoed through both realms, the Mesektet surged forward. The veil parted, and the first rays of the sun shot into the sky above Egypt. Night retreated, the stars faded, and the world awoke to the golden light of dawn. Farmers along the Nile looked eastward, their fields bathed in warmth. Children stirred in their beds, and temple priests raised their arms to greet the god they had called through the night. Ra's victory was complete, until the next sunset, when the journey would begin again. This was the eternal truth, the cycle never ended. Chaos could be defeated but never destroyed, and order had to be renewed with each passing day. To the ancient Egyptians, this nightly voyage was not simply a story, it was the heartbeat of the cosmos. They saw their own lives mirrored in Ra's journey, the struggles against darkness, the moments of renewal, the constant movement toward a brighter dawn. Kingship itself was modeled after Ra's role. The pharaoh was considered the son of Ra, tasked with maintaining Ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic order, just as Ra did each day. Temples dedicated to Ra, such as the great sun temples of Abu Ghorab, were built with precise alignments to the sun's path, ensuring that on certain days of the year, the first light of dawn would flood the sacred chambers. This was not only an act of devotion, but a living reenactment of Ra's emergence from the Duat. In art, Ra was depicted in multiple forms, falcon-headed with the solar disk, scarab beetle, ram-headed, or as an old man representing the setting sun. Each form spoke to a different stage of his eternal cycle. Priests played a direct role in the myth's continuation. Their nightly rituals were believed to give Ra strength during his underworld journey. Without their chants, offerings, and spells, Apophis might triumph, plunging the world into eternal night. This was a sacred partnership between gods and humans, a shared responsibility for the survival of all creation. Even beyond Egypt, Ra's myth left its mark. Later cultures adapted the image of the sun as a divine warrior who battled darkness each night. A theme that appears in Greek, Roman, and even later monotheistic traditions. The idea that light must be constantly defended against chaos became a universal symbol of hope and perseverance. As the day began anew, Ra sailed across the sky in his Mandjet boat, casting his golden gaze upon the lands and people of Egypt. But somewhere, in the farthest shadow, Apophis waited, patient and hungry. The people knew this, yet they did not fear. For as long as Ra rose each morning, they knew the battle could be fought and won, and so, the cycle continued, day into night, night into day, for all eternity.